Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if the way we think about what could have happened changes how we judge someone's actions? Well, this new study might have a clue. Today we're diving into some fascinating research that looks at how artificial intelligence, specifically those super smart language models like ChatGPT, might be changing the way we assign blame. How do we decide if someone is at fault when things go wrong? A big part of it is thinking about what else they could have done. Right? This paper suggests that the source of those what-ifs might actually matter, and that AI might be making us harsher judges. Imagine you are trying to figure out if someone made a bad choice. You don't just look at what they did, but also at all the other options they had on the table. This research started with the idea that people tend to blame others more when they think there were clearly better alternatives available. Now, here's where AI comes in. Scientists know that AI language models like GPT-4o can generate different kinds of options than humans do. So, they asked, what happens to our judgment if those alternative options come from an AI instead of another person? Think about it. Every day we make decisions, from what to eat for breakfast to big life choices. And a lot of our higher thinking, like making moral judgments or understanding why something happened, relies on our ability to imagine different possibilities. We constantly ask ourselves, what if I had done this instead? Or, what if they had chosen that? This is called modal reasoning. And it is super important. Normally, the world is full of endless possibilities. We can't possibly consider every single one. So our brains are pretty good at picking out a manageable number of likely or good options. For example, we tend to think of actions that are normal, probable, or morally acceptable. We don't usually waste a lot of time thinking about bizarre or impossible alternatives. And this is really key for deciding if someone is to blame, if someone messes up, and we think, wow, they had so many obviously better things they could have done. We're much more likely to hold them responsible. It is like there was an easy way out and they didn't take it. This research even talks about something called modal distance, which basically means how many of the possible actions people think of are actually better than the action taken. The bigger that distance, the more blame people tend to assign. Now, large language models, or LLMs, are getting incredibly good at processing and generating language. There's a lot of interest in how they generate ideas or options compared to how humans do. Some earlier studies hinted that LLMs might generate options that people find to be of higher quality, but also that the LLM's options might be more similar to each other. They seem to explore the space of ideas differently than we do. So, the researchers in this study wanted to put these two ideas together. We know that thinking about better alternatives increases blame, and we know LMS might generate different kinds of alternatives than humans. What if relying on AI-generated alternatives makes us more critical, and therefore more likely to blame someone? That is the central question. To test this, they designed two studies. In study 1, they had participants think about a tricky situation. For example, imagine Daria on her way to a concert with friends, and her friend Ted realizes he forgot his ticket at home. The concert is about to start, and Ted will miss most of it if he goes back. Now, half of the participants were asked to brainstorm 5 things they thought Daria could do in this situation. The other half were shown 5 options that were generated by GPT-4o. They were then asked to rate these options on how probable, moral, and normal they seemed. After that, they were told what Daria actually decided to do in this scenario, and then what the outcome was. For example, maybe Daria tried to buy a ticket from another person, and then the negative outcome happened. The concert staff got suspicious and wouldn't let them in. Finally, they were asked to rate how much Daria should be blamed. Here is what they found in study 1. Interestingly, when participants rated the options themselves, both human-generated and LLM-generated options weren't that different in terms of their perceived probability, morality, or normality. However, something interesting happened when they evaluated the agent's chosen action. When participants had just seen what an AI suggested Daria could do, they actually judged Daria's chosen action more negatively. They thought it was worse than if they had just brainstormed their own ideas. This is a crucial finding. Even if the LLM-generated options weren't explicitly rated as much better overall on those individual metrics, seeing them subtly shifted how people viewed the actual action taken. And this effect carried over to blame. Participants who considered LLM-generated options blamed Daria more than those who considered their own generated options. The research showed that the more participants felt the generated options were better than the actual action, the more blame they assigned. But it is not just about what people rated the options as. The researchers also looked at how the options themselves were generated. They used fancy computer techniques to analyze the meaning or semantics of the options. They found that LLM-generated options tended to be packed more closely together in terms of their meaning. They occupied a narrower semantic space. Think of it like this. If you imagine all possible actions as dots on a big map, human options spread out more, while LLM options tended to cluster in one area. Human options became more diverse as people generated more of them. But LLM-generated options stayed pretty similar to each other throughout. Also, LLM-generated options were often longer, more detailed, and more like full sentences, whereas human-generated options were often shorter, more like quick ideas. This difference in how options are presented and how diverse they are might be influencing our judgments. So, what does this all mean? In study 1, when people were actively generating options, they found LLM options were similar to their own in value. But later on, the LLM options were seen as potentially more valuable. Crucially, even if participants didn't consciously feel the LLM options were that much better. The set of options provided by the LLM changed the baseline against which they judged the agent's action. This led to more negative evaluations of the chosen action, and consequently more blame. A key difference, though, is that in study 1, participants generated their own options in one condition, which is different from just looking at AI-generated ones. So they designed study 2 to explore that. In study 2, they wanted to see what happens when people are just presented with options, whether they came from humans or LLMs, without having to generate them themselves. They used the same scenarios and followed a very similar procedure. Participants were shown either 5 options generated by another person from study 1 or 5 options generated by GPT-4o. This time, when participants passively reviewed the options, they actually rated the LLM-generated options as having a higher overall value than the human-generated ones. This is a bit different from study 1, where the initial ratings didn't show much difference. However, just like before, the value of options tended to decrease as more were generated. And this happened with both human and LLM options as the generation number increased. And again, this had an impact on blame. Participants who considered the LLM-generated options attributed more blame to the agent than those who considered human-generated options. This effect was strong. The perceived difference in value between the suggested alternatives and the actual action taken was a key driver of blame. When the AI options seemed better than what was done, blame went up. So, across both studies, the consistent finding is that when people consider LLM-generated alternatives, they tend to assign more blame. It seems that LLMs can shift our moral compass. We also saw differences in how humans and LLMs explore possibility spaces, LLM. Generated option sets were more concentrated semantically, meaning the ideas were closer together and less varied compared to human options. While LLM options were sometimes rated as better, their concentrated nature and the way they inhabit different semantic spaces might be the real influence. It is not just about if the options are good, but how they're presented and what kind of range they cover. What is really interesting is that even if participants didn't explicitly say the AI options were way better, the mere presence of these AI-generated alternatives changed the game. It expanded the set of possibilities participants considered, and that expansion led to harsher judgments. Think of it as the AI subtly raising the bar of what was considered a reasonable alternative. There are a few limitations to point out. In these studies, the participants knew when an option was AI-generated. It would be interesting to see if the effect is the same when people don't know the source of the ideas. Also, the options were generated before the outcome was known. In real life, we often reconsider possibilities after we know what happened and what the consequences were. But the big takeaway is that AI, especially these powerful language models, might be subtly changing how we engage in high-level thinking, like making moral judgments. As AI becomes more integrated into our lives, its influence on our reasoning and decision-making could be profound. It is not necessarily good or bad, but it is definitely something we need to be aware of. These tools can help us explore ideas, but they might also be making us more critical of ourselves and others. So, what do I think about this? It's a really clever study that highlights a subtle but important way AI can influence human minds. The finding that LLM-generated options can increase blame attribution is pretty significant. It suggests that the way AI presents information, even just a list of possibilities, can shape our judgments in ways we might not even realize. The semantic concentration finding is particularly intriguing if LLMs tend to produce narrower, more similar options that might create a specific kind of frame for a problem, making deviation from that frame seem more blameworthy. The implications are huge. We're already seeing AI used in everything from writing assistants to legal research. Understanding how these tools can nudge our moral evaluations is crucial for developing and deploying AI responsibly. It means we need to think about how to ensure fairness and avoid unintended biases. Future research could explore blinding participants to the source of the options, or testing different types of AI and different types of dilemmas. That is all for today's Mind Lab. What do you think about AI influencing our judgment? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the human psyche. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.